Hi, I'm Cassie, and this is a video series about my family's move from the US to Uruguay back in 2023 and some different things that we have learned since that move. Today's video is going to be all about the process and the costs of renting a place to live here in Uruguay and specifically Montevideo. So I'm going to break this video into some sections like I always like to do. I am going to give you actual numbers of our total move-in costs. So our actual rent and all of the different expenses that we paid to move into the apartment I'm filming this from right now. I am going to put that at the end of the video just because so many of the costs associated with it are things that are very different from the US. And so I feel like I need to explain what they are first so that you understand what the all-in total is at the end, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm a pretty good person to make this video because in the US, in Texas, I was a property manager. So I rented out many houses. I was very familiar with the process of renting places out to people. So I can really speak to how the process here is different from the process, at least in Texas and maybe the broader US as well. So let's get into it. Number one, the first thing you're going to want to do is find a real estate agent. Now, could you do this without an agent? Yes. Could you, as somebody who just arrived in this new country, maybe not speaking the language very well, do this without an agent? Probably not. Probably not. Find a real estate agent. One of the things that makes Uruguay very different from the US is that here there is no MLS. The MLS is the multiple listing service that we use as realtors in the US, and it is very regulated, and there are a lot of rules around it, around its use, and only realtors can use it. And so it's a pretty reliable database. All things considered, it's a pretty reliable database for real estate. And then the MLS is then put onto websites like Zillow, etc. So when you are looking for an apartment or a house in the US, you could go to one of those websites and you could know, okay, this listing I'm looking at is by this listing agent. They control it. Here, that doesn't exist. There is no MLS. There is no like central body that makes sure that everybody's behaving. It's kind of the wild, wild west. So what you have is brokerages full of agents, and they have their own listings. And literally, like when I walk down the street, I walk by a couple of inmobiliarias, I want to say is how you say it, inmobiliarias. And they actually have like bulletin boards outside of their office with actual pieces of paper stapled to them with their listings. Like that is what we're dealing with here. Many of them also have websites as well, but they're only going to have their in-house listings. So there's not a real easy way to see everything that's available. There's really just not. It's very inconvenient. And that's why, in my opinion, you need the real estate agent because they would have contacts with every brokerage and be able to call around and find what you need more easily than you trying to do that because they've obviously got the connections there. There exist a couple of websites that do have real estate listings on them. For example, Infocasas and Mercado Libre. But those are not regulated at all. The listings are often very old, and they don't even have like a days on market like on the listing. So you can't tell if the listing you're looking at on Infocasas or Mercado Libre, you can't tell if it's from yesterday or a year ago. Like there's no date anywhere. And so it can be really frustrating to use those websites. What I would suggest is maybe use those websites to kind of check out the price ranges, to say, okay, I know in Positos, these are like the price range, but if I go out to Buceo, this is the price range. If I go to Palermo, this is the price range. Use it for that. Use it to get like a general idea of what's available, but trust your agent when actually looking for the house, if that makes sense. English speaking agents do exist. I would ask your immigration or relocation company if they have somebody that they work with. Or just ask in any immigrant or expat group, and there are probably recommendations for English speaking agents. Me personally, because of the way real estate works here, because it is these like brokerages that have their listings, and it still feels very like it's who you know. What we did as a family is we chose our neighborhood first, which you should always do, right? You can change your apartment, but you can't change the neighborhood. So neighborhood first, apartment second. But choose your neighborhood and then choose a realtor who specializes in that area. So in our case, we wanted this particular neighborhood. We chose a realtor who is from here, has lived here her whole life, like knows everybody in the neighborhood. And we were able to get like a really nice apartment that's actually furnished, which is hard to do. And I don't know if we would have been able to get that if we were just like looking around online trying to DIY the situation. You know what I mean? But, if I didn't speak Spanish, I probably would have chosen an English speaking agent, and just anywhere I wanted to be, that would be more important. So, kind of weigh your situation. Okay, so that's finding your agent, getting started with the process of locating the property. A big difference between renting here and back in the US is that, back in the US, the standard procedure is usually to do a security deposit. So you pay the landlord like 1 month's rent as a deposit, and then you get it back when you move out if you leave the house in good condition, right? Here, that is pretty rare. Here, they actually use insurance policies, and the insurance company is like insuring the landlord that if you don't pay, they'll pay for you and things like that. So it's a total insurance policy for the landlord, but that you have to qualify for and pay for. This thing is the part that makes the whole process pretty complicated, because this insurance policy is all over the place. Like, you will get, this is one thing where you need to get like multiple quotes and talk to multiple people, because you have just a range of what you could possibly pay. You are going to submit a bunch of documents to this insurance company, things like pay stubs, a letter from your employer. Like, we had to have a letter saying that my husband's employer, who was in the US at the time, knew that we were here and was okay with that. Like, we had to submit bank statements. Like, it's not as intense as applying for a mortgage, but it's a little bit more than what you do applying for a rental property in the US, if that makes sense, because you're applying for this insurance policy. One thing about the insurance policy, one thing that makes it vary from literally like insurance broker to insurance broker, even if they're selling the same insurance, is that you have to have all of your documents, all of those things I said, the pay stub, the bank account, statements, things like that. You have to have them translated and then notarized. And so that process is that has a cost with it, of course. You have to pay the translator and the escribana to change your documents into Uruguayo, right? And then you submit your application for the insurance. How much that broker charges you to facilitate that process can change. because I had two that I spoke with. One was going to want 12,000 pesos for that process, and then the other only wanted 7,000 pesos for that process. So, I mean, that's a savings of like 125 bucks, which isn't nothing, you know. So, ask around, ask what they charge for those services. And then the policy itself is going to depend on not just the cost of the apartment you're renting, but all of those factors, like everything within your application. So I asked in a group that I'm in for people to give me feedback about this insurance policy thing. And for us, we just got, here's the cost of your policy, done. We just paid it and we were done. Some people had to pay like a 4-month deposit to the insurance company that they will then get back at the end, plus the policy amount. It was kind of all over the place. So that is the factor, I think, that can really vary the most from person to person. And that's the part that you really need help with. That is why I would also suggest asking your agent who they recommend for the insurance policy, because if they're used to working together, that will make it easier also. Like in our case, we actually used the listing agent's broker because they were in-house, and we were already sending all of our stuff to the listing agent. So it was really easy. He was like, okay, I'll just pass this over for you to our insurance side. And they just did everything. And it was cheaper than somebody that was like a standalone insurance broker. That may not be the case every time, though. I mean, I don't know. It's, again, just get quotes. And if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like it's a lot, then maybe ask for a second opinion from somebody else. Trust your gut. You know what I mean? So, agent, insurance. Okay, the third thing you need to know about renting in this country is that almost always apartments come unfurnished. And unfurnished here means a very different thing than unfurnished in San Antonio, Texas. Like if I rent out a house in San Antonio, Texas, that house is going to have a stove, it's going to have a water heater, it may even have a fridge. Like it has those things, it comes with those, the AC units, things like that. Here, unfurnished is really unfurnished. So many times apartments or houses will come without any appliances, even including the stove and the oven, even including your HVAC units, like your air conditioning units. I asked in my immigrant group, like, hey, what did your stuff come with? Like, what did your apartments come with? And I got such a range of answers. Some people, it didn't even come with a water heater. They had to buy a water heater, HVAC. One person had to buy light fixtures and mirrors and things. Like, it literally came with nothing. So you definitely want to make sure that if you're considering an apartment, you know exactly what it comes with, because those things are also not cheap here. I mean, they're not cheap anywhere, but they're really not cheap here in this country. So just be very aware that you may end up having to buy all of these appliances, and that could be several $1,000s just right at the beginning. And especially if you just moved here and you're doing all this immigration and you're putting all this money for the house, and then you have to also do several $1,000s in appliances, that can be rough. That being said, it is possible to find furnished apartments. It isn't common. It's possible, but it's not common. You might have to wait a little bit longer. But in our group, there were 3 people who have furnished apartments. So it is possible to find furnished apartments, but it's not very common. So just keep that in mind. If you find one, snatch it up. We found one. We were very lucky. It's very nice and we love it. The last thing is there will be some extra monthly costs that aren't included in the rent payment. So for example, there's something called gastos comunes, which are like basically an HOA or condo fee. This is especially common if you're in like an apartment building, because there will be, there may be a doorman, there may be whatever kind of situation in the lobby, somebody has to clean, etc., etc. These fees will be higher if you're in like a building that has a pool or something fancy like that. They will be pretty low if you're in a building that doesn't. They often include the water bill in this fee. And then even one of my friends said the laundromat, they have a laundromat in the building, and that's included in the gastos comunes. So, it includes different things, but that is going to be part of what you pay every month. And it can be substantial. It could be like 10-15% of your rent. So definitely find out what that is before you sign up for an apartment. The other thing is there will be like a small city tax that you have to pay. And I will go into that more with our breakdown of our costs. But every property, the way I understand it, the way my landlord explained it to me, is that every property has a tax that is put on the landlord, and then there's a smaller tax that typically the tenant pays. It is very minimal, but just so you know about it, you may be expected to pay this tax. It's actually just more of a hassle than it is the money. In our case, like, it's almost no money, but I have to remember to go in and pay this tax every couple of months. So there's that. Okay, I think I've explained everything, so it's time to get to our numbers for our case. Again, big disclaimer, this is just our situation. We rent a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, furnished apartment. I'm sorry about the dogs. They're not going to be quiet for a very long time, I think. When they're out for hours. So, our apartment is 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, furnished. It's about 750 square feet. It is in a great area. It's in a really nice neighborhood. So very happy with the location of it. But that's, so just so you have an idea, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 750 square feet. Our move-in costs, I'm going to do move-in costs first. So here you pay your own real estate agent. Like in Texas, the landlord pays for the person who helps bring the tenants, like if I was representing tenants and they signed up, the landlord would pay me whatever fee was agreed upon. Here, if you use a realtor, you pay them as the tenant. Everybody in our group, like every single person, said it was 1 month rent. 1 month rent plus the 22% VAT or the 22% tax. So in our case, our rent was 38,000 pesos per month. So in our case, it was 46,360 pesos, which in dollars is about $1,100. That's the fee that we pay to our realtor, the commission, I guess. Number 2, the insurance. So we used MapFre. Like I said, we paid $7,000 for the translation and notary services to submit the application. And then our policy came out to 25,905 pesos. The 7,000 is about $167. And then the policy itself, 25,905 pesos equals about $617 US dollars. So that was our all-in for the insurance piece. Then, of course, we had to pay first month rent to the landlord to hold the apartment, which was 38,000 pesos, which is about 900 US dollars. And then in our case, because our apartment is furnished, It's furnished even with desks and beds and couches and tables and plates and forks and pots and pans. It's literally everything you need to live was here when we got here. We had to pay our landlord $1,000 deposit, $1,000 US deposit for that. And if we leave it in good condition, that's refundable at the end. So our all in was about $3,800 US dollars, which honestly, like, isn't that much more than it would have been in the US. In the US, you would have put the security deposit, the application fee, all of that as well. But, I think having to pay the realtor ourselves, that was different. That's a big change. Worth every penny because our realtor was amazing, but it's still, 1 month rent, that's a lot of money. So that was all of our upfront costs before we could move in. And then let's cover our monthly costs. So we have our rent, which is 38,000 pesos, about $900. The gastos comunes that I talked about, that's the building fee, remember, that contains our water bill and pays for like the people who clean the lobby and clean the stairs and everything. That is 3,400 pesos per month, which is about $81. So like I said, it's around about 10% of your rent. And then our city tax is 700 pesos a month, which is about 17 US dollars. So our all in every month is 42,100 Uruguayan pesos, which is right at about 1,000 US dollars per month. That's our all in. That doesn't include obviously utilities like electrical and internet, but that's our rent, our building fees, and our tax bill that we have to pay. So all in all, I would say that compared to living in most US cities, your monthly rent is going to be cheaper. Your monthly expenses are going to be a little bit cheaper. Your move-in costs, that's where it can really vary. Because like I said, I know some people had to pay like a much bigger deposit than we did. I think it comes down to the ratio maybe of your income to what you're renting. Like we are renting this place is only $1,000. Like it's a pretty low rent situation. It's a small apartment. So the insurance policy is cheaper because there's less to insure. You know what I mean? So that could be a factor. There could be a lot of differences. That's why I think it's important to hire really competent people that you trust. And then I also think it's really important when you arrive here or anywhere you live in the world to get into some immigrant groups where you can ask like, hey guys, they just told me I'm supposed to pay this big old deposit. Is that normal? Is that what y'all had to do? And then your other people who have recently arrived can tell you, oh no, we didn't do that. We did this. Maybe ask our guy. You know what I mean? So start laying down those connections early so that you can protect yourself from being taken advantage of. I'm not saying that happens often here, but when you're unfamiliar with the process and unfamiliar with the way something works in another country, you definitely want to take every single precaution available to you. So anyway, I hope that was useful. It's very different. It's very scary. That was probably the hardest part of our process of moving here, was renting the place, because it just feels, everything's just so different, that it just, you feel like, oh God, I hope that I'm doing it right. But hopefully this can help you avoid some of the mistakes you could make. If you have any questions, or especially if you're Uruguayan, if I said anything wrong, please correct me in the comments below and make any suggestions for other videos you want to see in the future. And I'll see you next time. Bye.